Hi everyone and welcome to the Curious Geographer. I'm so excited today because I just think it's such a topic which so many of you will be kind of linked to or involved with it without maybe even thinking about it. So today we're going to talk about air pollution and why clean air matters, why we should be conscious about air pollution around our schools and like the issues surrounding it. So we're really lucky to be joined by Joe Harrison, who's Programme Officer at Global Action Plan, and he runs a programme called the London School Pollution Help Desk, which is a free service that can tackle air pollution across London schools, and it's got so many tools that I'm going to talk to you about, Joe's going to talk to you about, which is going to tell us how you can get involved, how you can contact your local government, how you can speak to your school about it, how you can just promote it across and actually use practical measures to improve air quality. Joe will also talk a little bit about how he got to where he was. So he's actually worked for the Fair Trade Foundation, which is really cool. He also studied his Masters in International Relations and Global Issues at the University of Nottingham and had a year abroad in the University of Hong Kong. So if you stay to the end, then we'll talk a little bit about how Joe got to where he is. So I'm going to pass over to Joe. And if you wouldn't mind telling us just a little bit about your role in Global Action Plan, and then we'll kind of get straight into the questions.
Great. Thanks, Ellie. Thanks for having me on. And hi, everyone. Yeah, so I work, as Ellie said, as a Programme Officer for Global Action Plan. Global Action Plan is an environmental charity, so we work towards a green and thriving planet where everyone can enjoy happy and healthy lives within the Earth's limits. So it's all about both people and planet, and as we kind of focus both on air pollution and on the excessive consumption of stuff. But as Ellie said, I work particularly on air pollution and particularly with schools, and run this specific program called the London Schools Pollution Help Desk, which is, supporting schools across London to tackle air pollution and think about what they can do, think about the different actions they can do. And lots of that is applicable to kind of the wider UK too. So don't worry if you're not in London. We've got lots of things that you can do too, both in your schools and as individuals. It's also worth mentioning Clean Air Day, which you might have heard of. So Global Action Plan organised that, and that's coming up on the 16th of June, so next month. And we're going to talk a bit about that as well, because that's a nice moment for everyone to get involved.
Brilliant. And so let's just dive straight into it. So what is the issue with our air in London and, as you said, around other schools as well?
Yeah, thanks. A good question to start. So I suppose it's kind of useful to first think about what air pollution actually is. And it's quite, I suppose, pollution gets used in loads of different ways around like noise pollution and pollution in terms of just litter and things. But air pollution is that term for the different types of pollutions in the air around us, in the air around us that we might breathe in. And I suppose the big thing being that it can enter our body and damage our health, our physical and mental well-being. And there's these particles and gases that come from things like road transport that can damage our health. So the issue, I suppose, in London and in the UK, air pollution is the biggest environmental threat to our health. And it can really have these big health impacts on all of our bodies, from our lungs to our heart. It can get into our bloodstream and things like that. And in London, I suppose it's a particular problem. London, and it is worse in urban areas where it's more densely populated, and obviously London fits that bill. And for schools in general, almost all schools are now in breach of the World Health Organization air quality guidelines. So that almost every child in the UK is going to school in an area where the air pollution might be harming their health. So it's really important to be aware of that, and be aware of the kind of level of this issue and how the WHO, the World Health Organization, who kind of changed those limits last year, brought them much further down, and made it more stringent to really show the scale of this problem, I think, and to show how much air pollution can impact our health. And then I suppose to think about young people, like the people watching this stream, young people can also be particularly vulnerable to the health impacts of air pollutions because organs and immune systems and things are still developing, and due to their size, they might be close to the, say, sources of pollution like car exhaust too. Um, so yeah, that's kind of the situation in terms of air pollution in London. But I think it's important to think about that's a bit doom and gloom, basically. But it is all solvable. There is stuff we can do. And yeah, I want to have a positive conversation about the actions that we can take in order to cut pollution, both for our health and for the planet and for kind of our local communities too.
Yeah, brilliant. That sounds, and I think what we were mentioning earlier, and my school's in Lewisham, and we've just done that with our year eights, and we were talking about it with our eco club today, was that a lot of students, actually, I have a student who went to school with her, but students might have heard of on the news about Ella Kizzy Deborah, and how she was the first kind of air pollution death. And so, as you said, we're going to concentrate on, like, as you said, the positives and what we can do as well. But I think that's important to recognise just like how severe this issue is. Now, if we just kind of quickly dive just into the causes, you've mentioned cars. Is it mainly from cars that is causing our air pollution? Just to clarify, is there anything else contributing to it?
Yeah, I would say cars are the main one, really. But more broadly, I think it's our kind of reliance on fossil fuels as a society. So lots of links with the climate crisis here. And that we have all these kind of systems and behaviors that rely on burning those fossil fuels. I suppose in cities it is road transport, and cars are a real major one. Obviously factories and things as well, that you might see the smoke coming up. We can mention indoor air pollution. You can get air pollution indoors, and that can come from like gases that might come from cleaning products or things like that. And then it's also worth mentioning domestic burning as well. So like wood stoves or things that people might have in their houses that then but you burn wood to keep warm, or maybe not to keep warm, maybe just as a nice thing to do. But actually there's kind of emerging research around wood burning and how that contributes quite significantly to air pollution and poor air quality too. So yeah, that's important to think about.
Brilliant, that was really good, thank you. So let's look at kind of the actions that people can do. And I've already got a question from Ikra, but I'm going to come back to that, Ikra, once we've kind of answered some of the other some of the questions first. So we often talk about actions at like an individual, a community, and a government level, and students will be very much maybe that like individual, but also community as a school as well. What do you think? What actions can kind of students to school leaders and above do to kind of tackle our issue of air pollution?
Yeah, good question about actions. And yeah, this is, I suppose, the meat of what we want to talk about today. And I suppose, firstly, I think it's really important to always think about those individual actions that we can take and that can make a difference. And whilst it might seem like there needs to be more done at the kind of top level, at the government level, in terms of regulation, so that we can live a cleaner, healthier life, and in order to tackle the climate crisis and things like that. I think that regulation often comes alongside more people caring about these issues and more significant pressure around them. So I think it's always I like to preface it with that. But as I might have said earlier, like, all of our air pollution crisis is solvable, and there are things that we can do. And I think focusing on vehicles, first of all, is really important, and things that we can do at the individual level around just cutting down the pollution we're exposed to and what we contribute to as well. So that might be things like thinking about how you're getting from A to B, and those sorts of things. Thinking about, like, there's I suppose broader things around deliveries, or like the other cars and vehicles that you might be kind of contributing to without really thinking about it. So are you getting like next day deliveries where the parcels might be there might be more vans on the road because we're all doing that, and these sorts of things. So at the individual level, I think it's those individual interactions that you can take yourself. I think there's quite a lot about just talking about it, actually, and telling people about these things. So some research that Global Action Plan did showed that there's kind of bit of a lack of public understanding about where air pollution comes from, what the health harms are of it, and what we can do about it as well. So whilst people like whilst over half of UK adults think that walking or cycling might be better than driving and might be a way of reducing outdoor air pollution, actually only a third actively do this. So there's a bit of a like knowledge action gap in terms of that, which I think we can all work on if we are talking about this and raising that understanding. So I think that's really important. And then, as you said, Ellie, it's kind of building that into your school or your communities or wherever you are, and whoever you're talking to, and thinking about where they might be able to take actions to. So at the school level, you talked about doing the audit, doing a kind of survey with your eco club today, and that's a really good thing that you can do. And we have one of the tools that I use with the London Schools Pollution Help Desk, and we use across the UK, is something called the Clean Air Schools Framework. And hopefully you can see that. That's it's kind of like an online audit tool, although that makes it sound more complicated than it is. It's basically a way of unlocking for schools, or for you as a member of an eco club in a school or wherever you might be, the different actions that you can take. So it might be that something that you can fill in or go through. It's a very simple online tool with a few survey questions at the start, about where the school is, what the school's like, and then it breaks it down with some recommended actions across 4 different areas, the 4 different areas on the screen there. So it might be something that you can do and then share with your teacher or share with your wider eco club, or the school leadership, and kind of show them those simple actions that they can take, because I think I think that shows that there are things that you can do. And to give a bit more detail, if I've got time, those different actions are around these 4 different sections. So to start on the one on the right, the traffic and the school gates, thinking about how people get to school, thinking about those kind of transport related things that I've already talked about, in terms of whether you just trying to promote active travel, trying to promote people getting to school in different ways, or building scooter parking or something like that might help to encourage people to do that. And then there's one around operations. So that includes things like the delivery stuff, but at a school level. And then also other things that schools might be able to do indoors around cutting pollution there. Excuse me. And then there's lots of actions under the education one as well, because I think that's really important. I think, as I've said, like, I don't think that many people know that much about this, know about kind of how it links with the health impacts, but then also kind of the climate crisis too, and how lots of the things that we can do to reduce air pollution will also help the climate crisis, help us kind of build nicer, cleaner, healthier communities. So I think it's really useful to have those actions in there. And there's stuff around, like, so if you're in the eco club, there's resources and case studies that you might be able to take away there and share with the wider school, share with the parents, share with the school leadership as appropriate. So there's lots there as well, and I think it's really important to think about, as I say, that education and that awareness raising side. And linked to that, I suppose, is the one on the left, the voice element. And I think going through something like this helps to show where as a school you might be able to influence, but also we all need to recognize that it's like the burden and responsibility is not just on the individual or not just on school to make the air cleaner, and therefore there's kind of ideas and suggestions and case studies in that voice section around utilizing the student voice to work with both local partners and then also national leaders, or talking to your local councillors or your MP, or people like that, to get them to make some changes, which will then make it easier for you to also make changes. For instance, so if it's like around a public transport issue and you want to get from A to B, but there's no bus or no cycle infrastructure or something like that, then that might be something that you want to take to a local authority, to a council or someone like that, in order to get some more change going on there.
Brilliant. Those were so great in terms of the different actions. It made it so clear. And also, just to highlight, like we just did it at lunchtime today, the audit around with the air pollution around our school. And it's so easy to do. So it really doesn't have to be a teacher. It can, if you are particularly interested as a young person, you can do it. And then, as you said, take the results to your teacher as well. So I just think actually the whole website is so user friendly, which is really fantastic when you want to encourage people to implement change. So kind of, that's what's really good. So can you just tell us, I know you've mentioned the website, but what is kind of, where can students go for help? I'm going to put up, the slide that has the link on it, but if you wouldn't mind talking to us about where can students go after this?
Yes, I think there's a couple more bits that I was going to talk about actually on that first slide around kind of other things that you can do at a more national level, more kind of governmental level. Shall I do that first and then we can move on to the website? Sorry, I stopped. I thought I talked too much, but I'll keep going now.
No, definitely do that.
So on this slide, there's a couple of bits around a couple of consultations that are kind of linking into that bit around talking to decision makers and raising your voice and raising the voice of young people. So the first one at the top there is something called the General Comment 26. And what that is, that's from the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child, which is a bit of a mouthful. And they basically advise on children's rights and the environment with the UN and have a climate change focus. And what this general comment is that up until the 30th of June, so you've got a month and a bit, there's an online questionnaire that children can complete around kind of broader questions on climate change and children's rights. But as part of that, there's mentions of toxic air and air pollution, and it allows you kind of to input your thoughts. So I just thought I'd share that as quite a nice thing. Again, it could be something you do with the Eco Club. You look at that. We've got some supporting resources, some kind of teacher notes and things like that as well around it. And I suppose that's just quite a nice way of, as I said earlier, kind of getting your voice, making your voice heard on some of these climate issues, not just air pollution, but kind of broader climate things too. And then that committee will take that away and work out what's going to be kind of put into more children's rights within the UN frameworks and things. So that's the first one there. And then the second one, I think it is the Environment Act consultation. So that's from DEFRA, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. So that's UK. And they've released some new proposals around legally binding targets for air pollution, and they're consulting again on those. So this is something else that you can feed into as young people. This one's a bit wordy, but it's around, I suppose, telling decision makers what you would make, what would make clean air easier for your community, basically. So again, there's opportunities there to feed in there, and that could be something that you look at as an eco club or as a school and think about what would work for you. So yeah, I just wanted to flag those two as things that you could do to take that further and to kind of advocate for change.
Brilliant, thank you. I think it's really nice putting it into the context of actually this is really what we're trying to achieve from like that kind of global governance link as well. So where can students go if they want to find out more?
Yeah, sorry, we'll go to that now. Yeah, so there's lots of resources, as Ellie's been saying, on our website. And I think there's a visual around the Clean Air Hub, which is a good place to start. So that's got some of the stuff I talked about on air pollution and what it is, the health impacts, things like that, as well as alerts and forecasts and things like that. And it lays it out in a really simple way. So that's a good thing to kind of improve your knowledge and understanding on these issues so that you're then able to go and talk to people about it. Similarly, there's we've got other resources around on our Action for Clean Air site, and that's got things like educational resources and case studies around different actions you could do, some like campaigns that you could run in your school, whether that's kind of around active travel or around getting a school street, which is when they shut the road outside the school. Some of you might know about those. So yes, on the Action for Clean Air site, there's lots of good resources there. In London, if any of you are in London, as we mentioned earlier, I run the London Schools Pollution Help Desk. So anyone from a school or school community can get in touch with me, with the help desk, and we have a website and a contact form and things. And you can get in touch with any kind of issues around air pollution or any questions you might have around what you could do in your school. Feel free to get in touch there if you're in London. And then I suppose more broadly, we've talked a bit about local authorities. So lots of local authorities will have someone who's working on transport or on the environment or on, so this is like the council level. So you can always get in touch with them potentially. And I suppose other like community level environmental groups as well who might be in your local area. And they, yeah, as I said earlier, I suppose that air pollution to me feels like quite a cross-cutting issue because it is something that has these health impacts in the UK, but also is very linked to this reliance on fossil fuels. And so it's something that lots of environmental groups are interested in too. And then finally, I think Ellie, you spoke to some of the students from it a few weeks ago, but there's the UK Student Sustainability Network, who are a network really of secondary students who work across different sustainability issues. And if you're in a secondary school, you can get involved with them. And I think that's a really nice thing to do in terms of hearing from other students who are doing things around sustainability, sharing ideas, hearing from speakers, these sorts of things, which could be really good.
Fantastic. I actually was just wondering, I saw on the Clean Air Day, something that's really interesting maybe for students is the pollution forecast. I think that's produced by the Met Office, but a good map maybe for students to look into across the UK.
Yeah, great point, Ellie. Yeah, and there's loads of monitoring going on. I should have said this actually. Yeah, so local authorities or local groups, there's lots more kind of air pollution monitors going up across the UK where they track the levels of air pollution. They're usually outside on a lamppost, sort of thing. And most of the data is then online. So it's really interesting to see the level of air pollution where you are, where you might be going. And then that can also be a good thing around thinking about any changes you might make. So I mean, the obvious one is like on the main road, the air pollution is probably going to be higher. So then you might want to walk a different route to avoid that. We actually saw it in London back in January. I don't know if, and I think a bit across the rest of the UK, that there was a big air pollution spike. So all these forecasts and maps told us this, and you could also kind of see it. I don't know if you saw that, Ellie. I can't remember when it was in January, but sometime in January, and where the pollution levels were really bad. And
I think it even says it on your phone now, though, doesn't it? On like the Apple Weather, which is quite interesting as well.
That's good. Yeah, they are starting to add it to weather things. And I think that was interesting. And I hadn't really experienced that before, where the pollution, you could almost kind of actually see it and taste it when you went out and about. And I think that was really interesting from a kind of thinking about how we talk about these things as well, because you talked about it being on the weather app, and there was quite a lot of like media about where the air pollution came from, and it being kind of around the weather and around high pressure, which is true to some extent. But I think it's also about thinking about the fact that our behaviours and the fact we're driving lots and there's not really much regulation mean that there's more air pollution too. So just interesting to think about that.
We do have some questions which I thought maybe we could ask before we talk about Clean Air Day. And interesting, just kind of on that, I've had a few students for their independent projects. They have to do some coursework for A-level geography, and some of them have investigated air pollution or the impact of the ULEZ, or the impact of road closures as well. And like, obviously you can, as you said, you can get data online, but they've also done like smell and sound mapping where they just like record whether it smells cleaner near a park. So that's a really interesting way of collecting data as well about it, because he said sometimes you can't always can't always see it or kind of smell it, but sometimes, yeah, you can, or if you were really thinking about it compared to two areas.
Yeah.
So we've got some questions that says, and this kind of links to maybe, I wonder what your views are on the ULEZ, whether that has been successful. But Ikra said at the beginning, how effective would you say catalytic I can't even say it. Catalytic converters, am I saying that right? You know, the ones in cars, are for managing vehicle emissions. So are they effective?
I don't know very much about that, I'm afraid. Okay. Yeah, I think more broadly, I think cars cause most air pollution. I think it's really interesting. I think the ULEZ is great in some ways because it gets us thinking about how we get around and gets us thinking about how we use cars. And it does ultimately, hopefully reduce the amount of cars. I don't know. Yeah, I haven't seen the data actually recently on that. And how effective it's been, but I'm sure it's had a positive impact on air pollution in some ways. But I think ultimately we need to reduce our dependence on cars. So I think all these changes to cars, and even to some extent electric vehicles as well, if we are still dependent on cars and we don't really change our lifestyles with that, I think the air pollution is still going to be reasonably high, and there's kind of no safe level of air pollution. So sorry, I don't know enough about catalytic converters. But yeah, that's kind of my 2 cents on cars in general.
And don't worry about this one. It'll be interesting to see if you know, because I know we've talked a lot about the health. Jitendra, sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, has said, what effect does air pollution have on forests and biodiversity?
Oh, good question. Yeah, I think it does. It does impact ecosystems and biodiversity too. I suppose we think about it quite a lot in the urban setting, and therefore it's less front of mind. But I think it does impact it for sure. But then so one of the things that schools can do is, and obviously cross-cutting with other things too, is plant more trees, plant a kind of green screen that you might have seen in front of schools. Which then helps to kind of act as a barrier and stop the air pollution getting through. So I suppose that's, again, I've taken the question a different way, but I'm sorry, I don't know all the details around how it affects biodiversity, but I'm sure it's not good for animals and plants too.
Yeah, brilliant. And then Clean Air Day, what is it?
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about it? Why is it important? What can students do? Over to you.
Yes, sure. So Clean Air Day, it's the UK's largest air pollution campaign. So it's like an annual campaign, annual day, as might be clear by the name. And it's coming up on the 16th of June. So around that time of year, every year, I think, as far as I'm aware. And it's a real moment to galvanise the sector and celebrate the work that's been achieved around air quality, but also kind of shine a light on what needs to be done, and lots of things that we talked about already today in terms of needing that greater awareness on how important it is to take action. So whilst it is a single day, I think it's really important for playing that role in mobilising change. So this year, so it's got a different theme each year, and this year's focus is around health impacts of air pollution and how it can affect every organ in the body. So some of the things I spoke about earlier, and we're encouraging people. The primary action is around walking. So obviously that's quite a simple thing, but it's around how that can be good for your health, good for the planet. There's loads of resources on the Clean Air Day website that can help you with that. And yes, we're asking people to kind of talk to someone about the harms of air pollution. So similar stuff to what I was talking about earlier in terms of that being quite a big thing you can do actually in raising awareness and spreading those messages. And then walk short distances, leave the car at home where you can. I know it's not possible for everyone, but thinking about how you get around. And then the final thing around we're asking people to do on Clean Air Day this year is around local and national decision makers. So again, stuff that we talked about in general about things you can do about air pollution. I think Clean Air Day could be a really good moment to kick that off. You've got about a month to kind of get organised, work out what you might want to do. And that can really have an impact because it's part of this kind of larger campaign with lots of people across the whole UK doing different things, whether that's schools or businesses or hospitals, or making some noise around what needs to be done. And that can demonstrate that large scale support, and that kind of give decision makers more of a mandate to implement the changes that are needed, because it's all ultimately about, well, it should be the way that democracy works, hopefully, should be about proving that there's people care, and therefore there's a mandate to implement that system change that we need. I suppose going back to the car point, that we need that kind of broader system change and more more significant alterations to some of the community stuff. Does that give a bit of an overview? I can talk a bit more about why and what young people in particular could do, if that's useful.
Yeah, it'd be great to hear about what young people can do, but I think it kind of links to what you were saying at the beginning, as in this whole kind of talk that air pollution, there are steps that people can do which are quite manageable initially to like start with, and I think that's like a really important thing that I'm going to take away from it, that even if it's like walking that extra journey instead of taking a different type of transport, there's kind of from smaller to large steps, and you make it so clear and so accessible on your website that I think there's like a template on writing to your MP. So I think there's a lot of support there to make changes, which is really fantastic. So yeah, what could young people do for Clean Air Day?
Yes, no, great points, Annie. Thank you. What can young people do? I did just want to say on that we've done some research again, and 25% of trips are under 1 mile in England. So it is showing that if you think about how 1 mile, that's about 15-minute walk probably. And like if you're listening to something, maybe like 5 songs or something. So it's really like not that much for those that are able to change that from taking the car to walking. But in terms of young people, I think building on those kind of major themes that I talked about for Clean Air Day earlier, just now, it's talking to your peers, maybe running an assembly in your school, or talking about it in your eco club, about the harms of air pollution, how it impacts your health, maybe bringing some of the links to climate if that's what interests you as well, and sharing that knowledge with the people around you. And then there could be something that you can do in your school around walking, around thinking about how people get to school, whether that's having a day where you kind of encourage people to walk to school or walk for some of their journey, or you do something else to kind of show the benefits of that, and some sort of walking challenge or things like that lots of schools have done. And then I suppose on the final ask point, it's bringing that together. And if there's things that you're like, actually at our school, we can't all walk or we can't all cycle because of X or because of Y, because the roads are really busy or the roads are really unsafe, or as I said earlier, like there's no public transport that links A to B and therefore I have to drive that bit, then that might be something that you could want to ask to write to your local decision makers and ask for what would make that easier, what would make some of your journeys easier to do in a way that is cleaner and less polluting for your community. So I suppose it's kind of very linked to what I said before, but they're kind of the things that I think that young people could do and could focus on for Clean Air Day this year.
Those are great ideas, thank you. I've got one final question, and then we always end our guests by kind of asking how they got, just through a pen, how they got to where they are. Apogit has asked, is acid rain related to air pollution?
Ooh. Do you know anything about acid rain, Ellie?
I do. I actually did teach it today. So
you can take this one then. I think you might know more. Yeah.
Well, I did double check. So acid rain is caused by like sulfur and like emissions which can come from cars. I think, and so sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides, which are released into the air. I think the issue is that acid rain doesn't necessarily happen, obviously, where the emissions occur. So unlike air pollution, which obviously if cars are in a local place, then that place is going to be more polluted and that can have immediate impacts. My understanding from acid rain is that because of our formation of clouds and wind and trade movements, therefore you don't necessarily see the impacts in that same place. So we wouldn't have much more acid rain than maybe somewhere else in a countryside in the UK, because that air has been moved to a different location, I think.
Very good. That makes sense to me. Yeah. I suppose that's also true to some degree with pollution as well, though, that it can all move around, and that like so it's not just you burning something in your garden isn't just going to impact you. It could also move quite a lot depending on wind movements and things. But no, good question. Sorry, I haven't got more knowledge.
No, I think, but to answer it, they do link, and because acid rain is mainly produced by the same
nitrogen dioxide
parts, which we call air pollution. But really good links. I hope my year 13s are listening to that, because we talked about that today. Right. So Joe, as I said, we ask each of our guests how they got to where they are, and I mentioned earlier that you work for the Fair Trade Foundation, which is fantastic. Now, you've done a lot of things that are very geographical, but you didn't actually study geography at A levels. So do you mind telling us kind of what A levels you did, how you decided to do your degree, which is really interesting, what maybe excited you about a year abroad, just to how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, looking back, I kind of wish I had done geography. It's the first thing I would say. I think it's all about, at my school, when I was doing my GCSEs, it was a language college, so I did 2 languages, and then history rather than geography for GCSE, and then I went on to do history, politics, maths and German at A level, so quite a mix. And I suppose that was just because they were the things I was quite interested in. Politics I hadn't really done before, but I think in general I was quite interested in international issues at that point, and how it kind of links to what happens here and what happens, how they're making those global links and the differences between different countries and systems and interactions between cultures and things. So then I decided to do international relations at university, which it's quite hard to know what it is really, but I suppose it's politics, but at an international level. So I did quite a lot of politics in different parts of the world, whether that's like looking at the politics of South Asia, or thinking about identity politics or gender politics more generally, and how different, as I said earlier, how kind of different cultures and countries interact with that. I had a year abroad in Hong Kong, which is great. Really interesting, different way of doing things in terms of the education side, but then also just really great to immerse myself in the culture. And this was back quite a while ago when Hong Kong was slightly more stable. So that was great. And then I ended up focusing a bit more around East Asia, having learnt more about how the politics and the systems work there. And I think generally I had an interest throughout that in kind of social justice stuff and development. So then coming out of university, I managed to get a job at the Fair Trade Foundation. So you might know them from the kind of the mark on the bananas or on the coffee or on the chocolate. So I worked for them for a number of years in their campaigns team, doing stuff around education and around some of their big campaigns. And that was really interesting, working in development. And then I suppose I moved over to Global Action Plan around a year and a bit ago. And that was an interesting switch for me, from doing stuff which was, I suppose, a bit more directly looking at at global issues and working with producers in countries in other parts of the world, to something which was a bit more UK focused and like local rather than global, but again, environmental, so it's a global issue. So that was an interesting challenge for me, really, I think, to do something a bit different, but also kind of I've always been interested in working directly with communities and schools, so that's kind of why that appealed, and getting stuck in a bit more, I suppose, and not being too stuck behind a desk, although inevitably you're still stuck behind a desk sometimes.
Brilliant, thank you. I just have one final question, and I know there's so much support on like the London help desk. Do you if just schools were interested, do you ever do any talks, or does Global Action Plan, or is it, I mean, one way that students can make their own talks as well about it? I just wondered if that's something that Global Action Plan does, is whether they do visit schools.
Yeah, so in London we have, and it could be something that I could do with the schools. There's quite a lot online as well, and quite a lot going on for Clean Air Day. If you search the Clean Air Day website out, I don't know if they're up yet, but we will be posting kind of different events that are going on, which I suppose all have this sort of theme and give a bit more detail there. And then if young people want to talk about air pollution in their school or run an event for Clean Air Day, then we're really happy to help and kind of point them in the right direction of what's out there. So please do get in touch if we can help at all.
And I've just put the link in the comments as well. So thank you so much for taking time. I think it's perfect timing as well, because it's just under literally a month yesterday that Clean Air Day is. So everybody can kind of start thinking about their ideas for school. And thank you for being a guest on the channel, but also I think the resources that are being produced for your programme are just so accessible to schools. So a big thank you from a school teacher as well.
Great. Thanks, Ellie. Thanks for having me.
I'm just going to say for everybody next week, so if you, in 2 weeks' time, next week, and that is the wrong slide. Next week we're talking about NEAs, not about Clean Air Day again, unfortunately, but it'll be about NEAs. So if you are year 12 or year 13 doing your independent investigation, please check in, because you'll learn about the top mistakes and how to avoid them. So from me, I'll see you next week.